Hey, and welcome to this episode of LangTime Studio Recap. Today we are going to be talking about Season 2, where we did the Tpaalha language, the language of the opossums, which we learned this season that opossum is apparently the real word. Possum is a shortening of it. It had gotten so convoluted in my head that I thought that possum was the real word and that opossum was a hypercorrection. But apparently it's not. It was the case that opossum is the real word, and people thought they were hearing a, indefinite article, possum. And so they thought possum was the real word, but that was in fact incorrect. And now you can hear a helicopter because, of course, there's a helicopter at 8 p.m. at night. The one night I decided to record something with the doors open because that is just how things go for me. Anyway, this is a darling little opossum with a walking stick that was done by Jesse. For those interested in the board game, this is the Kingdom of the Opossums. So the opossums are kind of like heavy magic users and then sneaky. They have alliances, separate alliances, kind of with the cats and the mice, and that's why they have one of the mecha tank classes. Otherwise, they have the rogues. They're big on the demonologists, and again, these we're going to come up with Tpaalha names for these various things. So it won't even be like there's one name for the class. It'll be like there are three different unique ones in this one, and then who else has the demonologists? Actually, I think it's just the cats. The cats have the other two. They're the only kingdoms that do. Anyway, but as you can see, they're light on attack. They're actually the lightest on attack for any of the kingdoms, but they are big on health and they don't have any magic using. Well, they do have magic using classes, but the thing is, the demonology class is a different way of getting MP. They don't have magic points. Anyway, so season 2 ran from October 1st, 2020 to July 1st, 2021. There were 36 episodes. Give you an overview of Tpaalha. With a nice long A. Jesse is really good at pronouncing the name of the language. Tpaalha is kind of a mirror opposite of Ingala. It's head final, nominative, accusative, and SOV. However, it is technically adjective, noun, word order, but there's a big fatty asterisk on that one because there's only like 4 or 5 adjectives. Instead, the bulk of adjectives are actually done as nouns, and they have a very unique construction, which I forgot to go over here. But essentially, like, there are a noun is followed by a noun, which is followed by one of 2 postpositions, and the postpositions tell you whether the noun in question is being modified by that thing on purpose or on accident. So, for example, if you've wanted to say the sticky opossum, it would be like the opossum that is in sap. And there's in sap on purpose, so it's like it's a sticky opossum and he meant to be sticky, or like on accident he fell into some sap and so he is now sticky. So that was kind of a unique thing that we did for this language. It just made sense based on the postpositions. I haven't seen it before in a natural language. Genitives or possessors follow the nouns that they possess. Relative clauses also follow the nouns that they possess, and these are strongly head initial characteristics, but everything kind of comes with a grain of salt. It is postpositional language. I think the genitive is probably the strangest one, but for relative clauses, there's like VO and OV, and then there's relative clause come first, and relative clause comes second. If the verb comes last, you can indeed often see the relative clause coming first. If the verb comes first, you almost never see the relative clause coming first. However, if the verb comes last, you can also see the relative clause coming afterwards. So there's kind of like a general preference for relative clauses to follow nouns cross-linguistically, regardless of typing. Anyway, so it's not a super surprise that this is head final and the relative clause follows the noun. The proto-stage of the phonology has, we decided based on the shape of the opossums' mouths. Now, with our anthropomorphic animals, they are changing shape as they become sentient and able to use human language. But we figured that at the earlier stages, they would start off with more opossum-like mouths. And so their language would start off with sounds that were better catered to the possum's unique physiology. And so they would just stick around, not like they can't do the others at some point. And so we decided that it made more sense for them to have retroflex sounds. And so that has an entire retroflex series. Da, da, sha, ja, ra, and la. Sorry, la. Yeah. And then the N kind of goes back and forth between alveolar and retroflex depending on what comes after it. A nice bilabial fricative because we reasoned that they wouldn't be able to do the lower lip to the upper teeth. Fa. So instead it's fa, bilabial. Another weak fricative in ch. Saza is really the only alveolar, otherwise pretty standard. In the modern language, there's an entire palatal series that emerges, and that becomes a big feature of this language. There's voicing that happens for the two weak fricatives, but also the weak fricatives can disappear at the end of a word into H. And then I think you can actually get a velar nasal phoneme now at certain places. And also the emergence of the wa distinction, and a big asterisk on that because I know there was a certain circumstance where it made sense that we would have wa, not hua, the voiceless one. But I can't remember what that circumstance was. So I put it on there just in case, but there might not actually be a wa. There might only be hua, which is, in fact, we spell with a W in the romanization. For the vowels, we had a nice central series. And you'll look at the back vowels, you'll see that they're unrounded. There are no rounded vowels in this language because we figured that was not going to be something that the opossums could do easily. And so everything is unrounded. E, and and of course, since these are central vowels, we had to kill them because I hate central vowels. And so this is the modern vowel inventory. You have 3 long vowels, but only the kind of cardinal ones. So E, and A. And then the rest of the vowels collapsed into either or A. So 5 qualities, with 3 of them having 2 different weights. The sound changes in this one are nuts, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't pretend to understand them, and things keep happening where they have to change. But this will kind of give you the flavor of it. So I mean, some things are like fairly understandable. So you have this, far, and becoming far. What happened is that the vowel lengthened before a voiced coda, and then that voiced coda devoiced, and when it devoiced, it became lateral. So par is star. And then arabat, for a lot of things, there was just mass loss of vowels of unstressed vowels. And so in the case of stomach, what happened was those vowels were lost, but then the word couldn't start with rb, and so it picked up an epenthetic vowel in the front. Opossum, azich, becomes ich. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. There was a lot of breaking. So we have this proto word rug, and it lengthens before the G, and again the G devoices. But then the U becomes ua. It's kind of a similar change happened in Finnish, where you see a lot of uo, like in Suomi, where there used to be o and it became uo. That's kind of what happened here, except with the unrounded vowels. Became ua, and so look. We also had R's disappearing when they were palatalized. Basically, the ra becomes ria, which becomes ya, which disappears for some reason. Why does the ya disappear? I don't remember why the ya disappears, but anyway. So narada becomes nyada. Raj becomes rush. You see kind of the same thing there. And then we had this wonderful series of rules where, like, for example, fa followed by ra causes the ra to devoice, and then the whole thing kind of gloms together and becomes hua. And so we have huak for reflection. The nouns in Tpaalha have cases. 2 cases, nominative and partitive, and 3 numbers, singular, dual, and plural. And you might be able to figure some things out here. So the dual basically is associated with a suffix that came from the number 2. So yi is 1 opossum. Egypti, that's it, is 2 opossums. And you'll also see the reemergence of the proto form here. So Originally, the word for opossum ended with a voiceless bilabial fricative, fa, and then it basically fortition happened, so the fa became a pa in the dual, and then it remained. And so it's just H in one place, it's P in the other place, and there's no more fa anywhere. Um, but essentially, this partitive form, where you have the G on the front, the nominative plural is built off of the partitive. So gji becomes sgji. And then the partitive plural, I'm sorry, and then the dual, of course, you just add the dual to the partitive singular. And then the plural form of the partitive is built off of the plural form of the nominative. Basically, it's the same word, because I think it's child, right? And the word for child is ug, and so it gets retained as just a G before a vowel and just an before a consonant, and so that's how you get uzg. And then you'll see that kind of thing happening with some of the other forms here. As to there's sometimes that there's vowel lengthening and vowel shortening depending on what comes after or before. In this case, look at the plural partitive. I really like this. There's like chain voicing that happens. And so we have this is form and a K that follows it, and it becomes a G. You can see this a lot in Tpaalha that gets these huge, massive consonant clusters where it's like you have a voiced one that starts and then like a series of voiceless ones, and then they all voice. And it becomes this big, meaty, crunchy, voiced consonant cluster. It's just wonderful. A lot of fun. And then for this one, there's also just crazy stuff that happens in the partitive plural. So shtah is the singular, and then the plural ends up being ujdah with voicing and a geminate. Wonderful little thing. Moving to the verbs have a split into non-finite forms, imperfect and perfect. Very simple. Positive and negative, again, not unexpected. Active and passive, same thing. But then they have this distinction, motive and active, that's very unique to this. And when we came up with this, by the way, I believe I mentioned this on the stream. Or at least my idea for this, it was inspired by a language by Sylvia Sotomayor, who created this amazing language that only had two cases, basically, sessile and motile. And she built everything based on motion. And it's one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen done with the conlang. And so I tried to do something like it and failed. But this language is still fun. So the way this works is like, imagine a verb ban, to jump, right? In the motile, it means to jump onto something, to jump to something. So it's like he jumped on the couch, he jumped across the ravine, something like that. The active is just to do a jump. So it's like, he jumped 5 times. Or like he jumped to grab the rock or something like that. That would be the active. So I see that there's 2 forms of active here now that I look at this table. Oops. This is active as opposed to not passive, and then on the right that's active as opposed to motive. Anyway, so you see the non-finite forms here. These verb forms are the bane of my existence. They're terrible. I hate them. They're impossible to remember. They do crazy things, and so they're just amazing, and I love them. They're just the most hideous. This is probably the most hideous thing I've ever attached my name to, and I love it. So this is, again, jump. So ban is just the infinitive. Banush is the negative, so to not jump. Then we get into the actual conjugated forms. Bantz, imperfect. Okay, I'm just going to say them, and you know which things they go to. Bantz, banche, right? Bantsur, I'm sorry, bantsur and banche. It's not that bad. It looks like a lot when you see it, but it's pronounceable. Then for the active column, bana, banche, banech, banche. And it's really tough. Those are the voiceless W's at the end. The hua, 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 banoch, banche. That was better, because before it actually just sounded like a voiceless bilabial fricative. That was more of the voiceless W. For the passive, it takes a passive auxiliary. And passive auxiliaries are basically understood to always be active, right? Or basically, they're defined as the thing that takes an object, and now the patient has been promoted. So ban look, ban ilgl, ban ilga, ban idishe, ban ilgo, and ban idisho, and that's them. Some of the crazy things happens between like the non-finite forms and then on the left and on the right are the active positive imperfect forms, um, and you look at them and you think, how are these things related, like especially the first one. So we have fush becoming fwa, rosh rilla, nuas Nazo, or I'm saying Naza. It's so tempting to say oh, but Naza, um, Nich, Incha, and then Tur and Cha. And they're all related and it makes sense, but they just look like they have nothing to do with one another. It can be wild sometimes. Every so often, like it's explicable, or it makes sense. Like, for example, ban versus bana. All that's happening is a truncated vowel. That's pretty easy. Here's a sentence. The opossum saw the child. My goodness, this language. Yep, the opossum saw the child. Now compare that to this one. The opossum saw a child. What happens is that the partitive singular is used with objects to indicate an indefinite noun. And that's just a part of the grammar, nice little corner of the grammar. The partitive has other uses, but that's one of its main functions. Here are some pronouns. Pronouns only exist in the first and second person. There are no third person personal pronouns. Instead, you just use demonstratives for that. For the two pronouns that there are, they have a plain form, but then also two different possessive forms, depending on whether they're alienable or inalienable possessors. And then, of course, singular and plural. For the writing systems, we have two of them. And this is inspired by one of our viewers, Logan Kersley, who mentioned that the opossums in the beginning anyway, before, again, they're kind of morphing, right, into more humanoid forms. But in the beginning, they were very poor eyesight. And his suggestion was, what would make sense is if they had a tactile writing system as opposed to a visual one. And so the form that you see below the top one, so the second line, that is a purely tactile form. And my idea with this was, because often when you think about tactile scripts, you think like, knots, knots on a rope, right? Or something like that. I was thinking, well, they're in caves a lot. And so what they could do is they could actually sketch these things out on the walls of caves, just with a claw, so that it's going to have a similar look to Ogam. But in this case, it's like you start at one end and then you just, draw it out. And then what happens is with that center line, other possums, the readers, will feel along the center line, and then they'll see when there's either a bump, or in this case, a groove, right? What type of a groove, if it goes up or down, and then they'll follow the groove with their hand, and we'll be able to read this way. And of course, the idea was that it would start with a little nose and little whiskers and end with a tail, because it would look like an opossum, like a word was the body of an opossum on the wall. So that was the second line. And basically, I came up with that one just kind of playing around, and our patrons on Patreon voted for which forms would be used and how it would systematize. Because in this case, it wasn't based on pictures. It didn't start as pictographs. It started as this tactile form. And so that's what made it more like Ogam, where it was just like it was a very conscious creation, as opposed to like we're starting with pictures and slowly evolving them. And then the top line is what became of it once they could see, once they were writing on paper. And yeah, it got very interesting. I included an option that I didn't think any of the patrons would go for. and they absolutely 100% went for it. Um, anyway, so um, what was I going to say? Right. So this is the tactile form. So a feature of the tactile form is that all of the consonants had a form that would be, if you're looking at it like this, a form that was below the line and a form that was above the line. Vowels, on the other hand, would cross the line um, and would go in either direction, or they wouldn't be represented at all. So the central vowels weren't represented at all. Instead, they would be indicated by the consonants, in that there is height harmony with the non-high vowels represented below the line and the high vowels represented above the line. So the two on the left that you see are just K and N with no vowels indicated. The first one would be pronounced kana because it will be interpreted that there are vowels there. Not necessarily, but conventionally. And if there was a vowel there, it would have to be schwa. If you flip those consonants above the line, suddenly the vowel that follows each consonant has to be high, and since it's not represented, it's the barred I, so kn. Moving on, there are two actual vowel characters, and they're mirrored. One is for the left side of the vowel space, one is for the right side of the vowel space, with the consonants below the line, then that's kena. With the consonants above the line, that's kine. And so that is basically the entire vowel space of this language. This, of course, moved on to the modern form, and you can see what happened to those three vowels. Oh, whoops. I forgot to do ah. Ah looks like a X. And of course, it doesn't matter if X is above or below the line. The ah, it's outside of the vowel system. It's always pronounced the same. And so it gets this X. Anyway, so those are what the vowels look like now. And then, of course, schwa is, again, schwa bardai is not represented. It's not written at all. And so this is what happened with how you wrote the consonants. In the ancient form, the consonants flip. In the modern form, rather than flipping it, there's basically a diacritic over the ones that flip, indicating how, in ancient times, this thing went up instead of going down. So there we have, B, D, F, G, K. There they are. You can see how they started and how it started and how it's going. Meme. Anyway, so there they are. Some of these are pretty good. Some of these need to be kerned a little bit better, in my opinion. But that's really fine tuning. I'll have to work on that. Here are some more modern forms, and you'll notice, like, if you compare K at the bottom to KH. KH basically starts with these two leading dots, letting you know something different is coming. Some modified version of the following consonant is coming. And so K is regular, and then K with two dots in front of it is the ch. And that turns into a line in the modern form, the line that sits before it. L's, those may be too close to one another. Oh, that's right. L and R go completely above and below the line, but they do flip. Unlike the vowels, they actually do flip. Let's see. And then we have all these guys. Very nice. The je there, and I kind of ran out of space here because then, oh, by the way, so the palatalized form of sa is sh, but the palatalized form of sh is also sh. So there's just two different ways to spell that. Anyway, I ran out of space here, so I just threw in some extra punctuation there for you so you can see what happened to it. In the ancient form of the language, there used to be like the start of a sentence and then also like the start of a paragraph. Start of a paragraph was 3 whiskers. Start of a paragraph was 2 whiskers. Now it's just, there's just one. There's no reflex of that in the modern language. They lost that. Here's some example of words completely spelled out. Puck, reflection. Zung, fire. Svaka, dry. Nyada, flower. This is a fun one because the R is still written, but it's just disappeared. For the number system, It's actually just base 6, so that's pretty easy to get a handle on. I thought those ended up looking pretty good in the modern form, in my opinion. Um, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Something's off about 6 because it looks identical to 3. And that was not intentional. I'll have to figure that out anyway. Trust me, 6 looks different than that. You just have to take my word for it, all right? Anyway, and then here is a full sentence written out. Oh, whom did the opossum scratch? Let me try that again. Oh my God. Whale. This language, I tell you. Oh my goodness. Let it not be said that I didn't say anything about the three nuns. Have a good one.